I will hopefully prove to you all that this is one of the most important things in understanding the
Exactly.
challenges of relationship to the ultra Orthodox community.
Where's your Chabad rabbis?
You know, Chabad is very interestingly not here for very good reason. You'll understand when we get started.
Uh-oh.
No. This one is a good one. But,
Judy,
Okay.
Let's see if people can identify all the rabbis that are here.
oh, come on. Chofetz Chaim, that's one.
Yeah, that's the, I was just about to say, that's the only one that I hear.
Chazon Ish. Chazon Ish is below.
Underneath him, right?
Okay, that's where I know. The one,
They're all Jewish.
there's Rav Shach all the way on the other side.
Shach is in the middle.
Or the middle.
Can you figure who these people
This
are?
one is Rav Shach? No.
Yeah.
Rav
This
Shach is down
is-
below with the tefillin on, with the
Tefillin, that's of Shach.
with a lit for kippah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the one that Chabad is super against.
Yeah. How about the one on the right hand side with the nice hat that he's wearing? Is that like Reb Leibovich from who's that?
This one, that's Rav Chaim Ozer Gordinsky.
Oh, that's a Chaim Ozer. Chaim Ozer. Okay. Chaim Ozer and
On top of him is the most important figure in this discussion. That's Rav Elchanan Wasserman. In the bottom corner is Rav Shalom Eliashiv.
which
And
one?
This is Rav Zev Soloveitchik, known as Rav Velvel, next to him.
That's the Brisker. That's the
There's
Brisker.
Rav, and the one here, the one just passed away, that's Rav Steinman. And the one most important today is Rav Chaim Kanievsky, and that's the corner. No. The one on the top is the mystery person, but that you have to listen to the whole thing to figure out who it is,
Yeah, all right.
because he's the mystery behind all of this.
Ravelvo was Rav Moshe Soloveitchik's brother.
No, was his brother.
I said his brother. didn't I say?
Brother, yeah, he was the son of Rav Chaim. He was the Brisker Rav, the one that came to Eretz Yisrael and was the most anti-Zionist.
Yeah.
He's the most anti-Zionist of everybody on the screen, if you don't count Rav Elchanan Wasserman, who was before the state. So it doesn't really count. So welcome everybody. Good afternoon. And oops, I'm unmuted. The lecture that we have today is called Daat and Ultra Orthodox Leadership, or Modern Orthodox Leadership, or Ultra Orthodox Leadership today, not as traditional as you thought. In the next hour or so, what I'd like to do is present the concept, or the doctrine, as it were, of Daat Torah, which you probably heard in the public sphere, either in the ultra-Orthodox press or otherwise, has developed over the course of the last century or so, and we'll talk about the or so, where it came from, what it has gone through, and where it is today. And hopefully at the end, what I would like to do is tell you why you should care, why it makes a difference, what this concept, what its place in the context of ultra-Orthodox thought, general Jewish thought, and where it plays a role in the public sphere in Israel today. So Daat Torah has basically exploded onto the press. Everywhere you can see up Daat Torah, Daat Torah, Daat Torah. There's some very interesting, what is it? What does it mean? It means literally the knowledge or the wisdom of the Torah, but what are they referring to? Now, most of what I'm saying will be the product of the different studies of Professor Benny Brown. He began his enthusiastic work on this topic already in his master's, which was published which he finished in 1997. I was fortunate enough to take a undergraduate course with him in the early 2000s, and since then I've been taken by this topic. I even toyed with the idea of changing my subject and going to study, but it's his thing, and I will show what he's done with this topic throughout. Many people have written about it, but he really is the central figure, both in Israel and acknowledged overseas regarding this topic. Now, Benny Brown sees his research as an outgrowth, and he says it very clearly, of the basic idea that was presented by Professor Jacob Katz. Professor Jacob Katz, who in his last position, a professor of Jewish history, modern Jewish thought at the Hebrew University, he proposed in an article, and a number of articles actually, he wrote also a number of things about Daat Torah, but that's not what we're going to talk about now. But what he tried to show is that ultra orthodoxy, what we know, the Haredim, their community, and particularly their ideology, their theology, and their practice, is not traditional Judaism. Even though they perceive themselves, and often they are perceived by others, as the perpetuators of traditional Jewish thought, and very often we as tour guides, you'll say they're preserving, they try to go back and do what there was done in Poland and in Hungary and so on. Professor Jacob Katz wrote, and the article is titled Orthodoxia Kitguva, Orthodoxy as a Response. What he claims is that ultra-Orthodoxy in many ways is a reaction to the modern challenges. What does that mean? It's a reaction to the Haskalah movement, it's a reaction to assimilation and intermarriage, all the different, meaning that ultra-Orthodoxy does not just maintain the traditions, the dress, and the language of their earlier communities, but they have evolved. Their theology and their practice and their ideology has evolved over the years. And now he's speaking of a large gamut of concepts and ideas, and you're welcome to go see his research. His last articles about were written in a book that was published just after he died. He finished weeks before he died, Eit Lachkor ve'Eit Litbonen, a fascinating short book, but a very, very critical one in understanding historiography. Particularly ultra-Orthodox historiography. But in any case, so what Benny Brown does is, it does not relate directly to this, but what his research has shown is that Torah is a part of this idea that ultra-Orthodoxy in its practice and its theology is a reaction to the modern challenges. Okay, so Daat Torah does appear in some of the classic sources. It appears one time in the Babylonian Talmud, in the Tractate of Kulin, on the page 90b, where it's talking about a very specific case about the sciatic nerve. It is completely technical and has nothing to do with what it later becomes. It more or less means, and you can see how it is translated here by the ArtScroll translation, as logic dictates. That's what it means in the context of this, and it is completely irrelevant to our topic, so we're going to quickly move on. Okay, but understand that Daat Torah as the terminus, Daat Torah does not appear in any of the ancient sources. Even in the medieval sources, it does not appear as it's going to appear in the modern sources. What does appear is another concept, and that is kulaba. And that appears already in the Mishna AVOT, the 5th chapter, and different editions of it in different Mishnayot. Ben Bagbag says, turn it over, and again turn it over, or flip through it if it's a book. If it's a scroll, then spin it. I think hafachba doesn't mean turn it over. It means to spin because you're in a book, and their books were scrolls. But I'm not going to get too picky about that. For all is therein. Dekula ba. It means that, and it's referring, of course, to the Torah, that all is in the Torah. Now, this is Mishna AVOT. These are ethics. These are moral ideas, either for the judges or for the leadership or for the lay people, but it's not halacha. It is not a formal law, and there's no real explanation about what this means, or this concept that everything is in the Torah is something that does appear in the works of the Maharal from Prague, and many others talk about how all wisdom can be found in the Torah. But this idea which is part of the doctrine of Daat Torah, in the modern world has been taken to an extreme. Okay, so what has Benny Brown identified? In his first article that was published after his master's, which his master's includes much more material, and I suggest if anybody's really interested, they should try to get a hold of that. He identifies three distinct stages in the development of Daat Torah as a modern doctrine. The first stage begins in the mid-19th century, and it goes until World War I, or more specifically, until the First Aguda Convention. Particularly within the works of two rabbis, and those two rabbis were on the first page, the Chafetz Chaim and his student, Rav Elchanan Wasserman. Lawrence Kaplan, in his article on Daat Torah, does mention it, but actually discounts Rav Elchanan Wasserman and says that it was only the writings of his editors and so on, which Benny Brown goes ahead and brings him dozens of sources in the works of Elchanan Wasserman, and showing that he clearly was speaking about this concept of Daat Torah. Again, I haven't actually defined what Daat Torah is. I will in a moment. I'm just talking about its first stage of development. Rav Elchanan Wasserman, Chafetz Chaim and Elchanan Wasserman were central figures in the Lithuanian Yeshivish or Mitnagdim community. What we're going to see in a moment is the Daat Torah is specific to this community. The Ultra Orthodox community, the Hareidi community, can be grossly divided into two, and that is the Hasidim on one side, with all their different courts. Chabad we will include for the sake of this, although Chabad is distinct, and I'll mention that a little bit later. And the other half, and it's not always 50-50, but in Israel today it's almost there. That's the Mithnagdim community, the non-Hasidic community, formerly the anti-Hasidic community, but today is just the non-Hasidic community, Litvish community, the Yeshivish community. This Daat Torah doctrine is primarily a concept as a leadership doctrine within this community. And this first stage, what does Benny Brown identify? He identifies the development of the concept of Kula Ba. What is Kula Ba? It means that everything, all wisdom can be found in the Torah. Now, how does a person that studies the Torah is able to come to the awareness of what this Daat Torah is, what the wisdom of the Torah is, the true Daat Torah. Now, one more, this is something which you may find in earlier writings, but they have gone to a further extreme. And they say that if the way you achieve Daat Torah, or the ultimate Daat Torah, is to not have any other foreign confusion. You can't have any other knowledge, no secular knowledge, no scientific knowledge. You have pure Torah knowledge, and purity of that knowledge is the way that you can access this Daat Torah as a way for making decisions. Now, you can imagine, now this comes to when this concept is adopted by the community leaders, which were in fact rabbis, but they were mostly what we would call askanim. And it's very important to remember the purpose of askanim as we continue, literally businessmen, but askanim are the movers and shakers of the Hareidi community, and they're going to be very important when we talk about this concept as it develops. So the leaders that started the Aguda as a political movement in Poland, they actually came from Germany, but the movement began in Poland. This Daat Torah, in its second stage, becomes a tool for the leadership of Aguda and the Lithuanian rabbis in a way to first give over their decrees, but their decisions. Okay, meaning if they have a policy issue in Poland that they would like to make a comment about, so it's not halacha. If it was halacha, they knew what to do. They'd call it halacha, and they'd show you where it says in the Shulchan Aruch where this is from. But that isn't this. Daat Torah is a decision that is not in the Shulchan Aruch. The Chafetz Chaim, who's going to be a major promulgator of the Daat Torah, is going to call it the 5th volume of the Shulchan Aruch. And so in this time period, it begins to become a tool, a political tool of leadership. This is what Gershon Bacon focused on. He began it. He often thought that it began. Gershon Bacon did significant work about the Aguda, and he wrote an entire book about it, based in Columbia University, and this was his theory. What we're going to see is that Benny Brown has identified all these different things. Basically, they're all part. They're not different. They're not competing definitions, but mostly each and every scholar which looked at it, Kimi, Kaplan, Mendel, Prakash, the different ones that looked at it from their angle, and all these things are later part of this kaleidoscope of what eventually will become Daat Torah in Israel in the modern times. The third time period of Daat Torah is when it makes Aliyah. It's when this concept comes, particularly with the Chazon Ish and later Rav Shach, as the leadership tool of Orthodox are becoming a central theme in their political theology. Political theology will be the last stage of it, and if you're interested, Benny Brown has written an entire article about Daat Torah becoming political theology. It's available online on his academia site, and you're welcome to go read that. But these are the 3 different time periods, and they're distinct in every one of them, and they're part of this evolution, both of this concept and also of the evolution of the modern Ashkenazi Lithuanian community, which you understand is only a very small portion, both of the ultra-Orthodox community, which, if we're going to talk about, also should include the Rav Ovadia Yosef and all of the Oriental Jews coming from Arab lands. But this group was so powerful, and it was so elitist, and this is going to be where it's going to distinct from Chabad very soon. How elitist it was, it has had an impact well beyond the borders of this community, and that's one of the reasons it's going to be so important. So what is Daat Torah? Let's finally get to that. We've spoken about it now for about 20 minutes. We haven't actually defined it. So one of the things that we did in this course is we went through each and every element of it. Now, not with every rabbi or not with every group or every community, you're going to find each and every one of these components as part of the doctrine. And I'll give a few examples of that as we go through them. But these are all of the different aspects of it that make it distinct from traditional halakha. Okay, I do have in my closet over there, dug under there, my smicha of what it means to become a rabbi. Now, what is smicha? What is rabbanut? It means that you have the knowledge of halakha, and you know how to go to the sources and come out with what halakha is. That's not Daat Torah. Halakha and the traditional responsa always found sources. You always have to show your sources, and there's a world of different opinions. This opinion, that opinion, and there's a wonderful place for machloket, for arguments and disputes within the concept of halacha. But when we get into the realm of Daat Torah, we find something else. And what do we find? We find kulaba, what we were talking about before, that all wisdom can be found in the Torah and only in the Torah, which is this new edition. We also find infallibilitas, or infallibility. Infallibilitas and ex cathedra are 2 concepts which we've borrowed from the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church and from the Pope. One is that any decision that's given by this rabbi that is giving over Daat Torah, one has to be correct. By the way, I can show you that it's something that is unique and modern, because one of the rabbis in America, Avi Shafran, waves the flag. No, it doesn't mean infallibility, in his article about it that he wrote in the New York Jewish paper a few years ago. But you see it clearly being written in some of the works of the rabbis and the political leaders in Israel, that if this is the decision of Daat Torah, it has to be correct no matter what. You can also imagine that if this discussion is being done in the 1950s and 60s, and they were speaking about the Daat Torah that was given by many rabbis of not coming to Israel and staying in Europe, and it's going to be safe in Europe, you can understand the concept of infallibilitas and how that works. And I'm hinting to some of what Benny Brown shows in the writings of particularly Rabbi Michtav Meliau, Rabbi Yael Dessler, who came from England and was very influential in this community in the early 50s and 60s. And he dealt with this concept very straight on, and I'll leave it at that. In any case, ex cathedra means that the power of the source of the authority is not from the fact that I can now, and it's similar, and it's not of the next one, but it's coming from the actual chair itself. Ex cathedra is talking about the Pope giving over a decision from his chair. So the source of the authority is not any type of legal precedent as halakha normally would have it. And this leads into the next concept, is that usually when we have Daat Torah, there are no sources or proof required or part of it. Is that the rabbi says this is Daat Torah and everybody has to follow. And that's not the way halakha works. Halakha normally has there's some rabbis that left the tradition. Or Moshe Feinstein, in some of his tshuvot, will quote the Gemara and say, this is what I decide, and he's completely putting aside an entire world of later rabbis that have argued otherwise, but he felt that it was able to go back and do that. But that is still within the legal discourse of the traditional legal discourse. This Daat Torah has taken us outside of the traditional legal discourse. It is no longer part of that realm. The fifth thing is where it affects us most, and that is that it's this Daat Torah decision, okay, as opposed to halakha, pertains to all matters of life, public and private. And this is, some of the early rabbis were only talking about public, but today it goes even to private, that you need to have a Daat Torah about what you go to work and where you can, what kind of phone you have, and the Daat Torah of whether or not girls can go to Shirut Leumi or boys can do Shirut Leumi. There's a Daat Torah that says you can't do that. Everything, and it's not only formal halakha. And this is completely novel. Okay, now, if we'll already start to allude to it. Now, this sounds like something. What does it sound like? It sounds a little like the way some of the Hasidic courts run, that the Hasidic Rebbe decides for, especially within Gur today, but not only. In many of the other groups, in Belz and Babov, the Rebbe is sometimes very, very influential in the daily lives of the community, and particularly in some of the private individuals. So this is something which is already sneakingly sounding like the Hasidic world, but we're not talking about the Hasidic world. We're talking about the Lithuanian, the Misnagdian, the Yeshivish world. Okay, the sixth is something that we're going to find in the most recent writings, not in the earlier ones, and that is the Daat Torah is almost at Ruach HaKodesh. Sometimes they don't have the audacity to say this is outright prophecy, but it's ironic because part of the power of the rabbi is the Talmudic phrase Chacham adif min Navi, that a wise man is better than a Navi. Now, what that means in the context of the end of the Second Temple period is that a rabbi speaking about halakha has precedence over a Navi who's giving future thing. The halakha is going to replace, the rabbi is going to replace the Navi and the Kohen, if we're talking about specifically that time period. But it's now, we're coming full circle, and we're saying that this rabbi, who spent all of its time in studying Torah only, okay, not modern science and not wisdoms and anything else, can achieve this level of Daat Torah, which is almost prophecy. And this is something that we find in the most recent one. And even though Benny Brown has identified the three stages in his later article, again, that I'll show you a little bit later, he already identifies that some of the later rabbis have taken it even farther at fifth and sixth, and by then it already starts to lose its concept of stages. Basically, every single rabbi in the recent times has taken it in their own particular direction. That leads us to the seventh element, which I don't believe, by the way, is completely novel. And that's why it is in parentheses, meaning it's not novel that a rabbi will receive his power from his charisma and his effect on his students. That in the Lithuanian world, since the Gaon of Vilna, and you can even say in the European world, the non-Hasidic or the pre-Hasidic, Hasidic world, prophecy, sorry, yeah, I got that. The rabbi, how is it that one rabbi received distinction more than another? It's often completely random. There's no actual system that one rabbi is chosen over the other. Okay, it's a lot of politics and internal dealings, and it's usually the most senior, but it's a lot of charisma and a lot of who the rabbi is, and it's a very interesting way that they've been chosen. Like, how do you know who is the Gadol Hador? Like, everyone agrees it's Rav Steinman. Who chose Rav Steinman? There's no council. There is a council, but that they don't actually choose who the council of sages, but they don't actually, of the Agudat Yisrael, but they don't choose who's the Gadol HaTorah in that generation. It's someone that sort of earns it by his charisma and by his leadership. But it's an element of Daat Torah, because when we speak about who are the people that can say a Daat Torah, I can say Daat Torah, right? I can just say, no, it's got to be someone who has this chosen charismatic leadership. And again, there's no formal body and no formal way to do it, which makes it much more chaotic almost sometimes. Today, there has been almost a democratization of Daat Torah, and often you'll have, when there's central ideas, you'll have about 10 different Daat Torahs going out, which somewhat takes away from some of the aspects of it here. You have one coming out of Rav Steinman, one coming out of Rav Ovadia Yosef, another one that's going to come out of the neo-ultra that call themselves Zionists, what we call the Chardal community, and so on. So this is Daat Torah. And what is it? It's a political, theological doctrine that has developed over the last century and a half, and that has basically taken over the ultra Orthodox world, and that is something that now there are two other elements to modern ultra Orthodox thought that deserve mention and are part of this concept, or part of what one is called Emunat Chachamim. Now, Emunat Chachamim, the belief in the faith in the rabbis, is something that appears already in very early rabbinic writings, that we should have faith in the rabbis. But here is that it's as a modern doctrine, is that basically the rabbis are as leaders, as both political and religious leaders, are we have to follow them, and we have to, and like say after the Holocaust, they made decisions, and even if they looked like they were incorrect, we have to have full belief that they were doing it and that what they said was correct. The other one is called Emunat Tmima. And and this is one of the things again that Benny Brown has shown, is that Emunat Tmima, as a part of the modern ultra Orthodox thought, is that we should no longer delve into the Rambam Moreh Nevuchim, and we shouldn't get too confused in philosophy and traditional philosophy, but we should have the ideal way for a person to worship God is through simple faith, belief in whatever it is. And I'm not going to go into it in detail now, because I already want to get into the last chapter, which I think is the most important one. And that, but you should realize that Daat Torah doesn't stand alone. It stands within a new new mosaic of ideas which build this modern Hareidi thought. One of the things that Benny Brown has done over the last 20 years is he has taken their writings and told them basically where they fit within the context of traditional Jewish theology and philosophy, which is something that very often the ultra-Orthodox writers either don't have the capacity or don't see the need of doing when they're actually writing these things. This goes back to the Chazon Ish, which was the topic of his doctorate, going through all the different rabbis, and basically he takes their writings, reads them through, and then tells them where they fit within the context of Jewish theology, which is, I think, somewhat fascinating. What I'd like to show you is his let's get to the summary. This is the summary of this article that I was telling you about. This is the final article in Harvard Theological Review, Jewish Political Theology, the Doctrine of Torah Case Study, 2014. It's 36 pages, so you're welcome to read the whole thing. But what I want to focus on is his summary. Okay, here, let's start over here. The recognition may arguably explain what Daat Torah's appeal, as well as the dynamism that has enabled it to adapt to circumstances. And so we return to the point where we began. Daat Torah not only contributes substantive content to the literature of political theology in the 20th century, but also makes a methodological contribution of scholarship to theology itself. Okay, as such, Daat Torah can also shed light on additional Hareidi ideas, as well as others outside the Orthodox world. In sum, the definition of Daat Torah's political theology is not merely a semantic categorization, but instrument for better understanding the concept of political theology altogether. Okay, what he calls it here, I skipped it, precisely on the account of its unsystematic nature and its often weak theological formation, it provides an occasion for us to reevaluation of the definition of, so he calls it indeliberate theology. So the theology that has developed over the course of this particularly goes the last half a century, wasn't part of any organized doctrine. It's something that happened, which in many cases came out, let's say, of Rav Shach's political involvement in the Israeli scheme, in the Israeli political scene. And those things led to decisions that were made or attitudes that were taken, which helped form what later became this not just political tool, but also a theological tool. So Daat Torah affects how the community relates to one another but also how they relate to God. And this is a very, very interesting way of looking at this phenomena, because as we're going to say, and let's just go back to a new share, because what we're going to see is that going up to the coronavirus, what happened there are all affected by this doctrine. So in the last chapter of what I'd like to speak about today is so what? Meaning, other than our intellectual curiosity and understanding our neighbors, why should we care about Daat Torah, and why should it affect the way we relate to the Ultra Orthodox community? Now, not every person in the Ultra Orthodox community will understand it in this way. They won't actually, that nobody has formulated it for him. They didn't take the course of Benny Brown defining exactly what it is. They've heard Daat Torah since they're kids and assume that it is something that has always been around. And that's the way it's taught. But it's something that we should be, that's another thing that we have to be wary about. So the first thing is we should care about every person in the country. We should care about Arabs, Muslims, Christians, everyone that's in this country. We should care about where they're from and what they're thinking. That's number one. So that's especially Torah guides, but everyone should care. The second is the Ultra-Orthodox are very influential in the public sphere. Now, again, I'm only talking about the Lithuanian, but today they form one whole, and that is what is called today United Torah Judaism, right? Which has on one side Agudat Yisrael, which traditionally is the representative of the Hasidic groups, particularly Gur is the most powerful there, but others are also influential. Litzman is the Askan of the Rebbe Mivgur. That's his position. That's where he's there for. He's there to represent the rabbi. But the other side, which is Gafni and his, are representing the rabbis on the Lithuanian side, and they cannot budge without their decisions. So they're very influential in the public sphere, especially when they have the position of now again, Litzman was a Hasid, and that's going to relate to my final comment, and that's going to come up a little bit later. The second thing is their growing community. Today they're 12%, and the most recent research, which was done by the Israel Democracy Institute, they put out a yearbook in 2019, projects that there'll be 16% by 2030. But one of the other things that you can see there in this yearbook is that 50% of their community is under age 16. Under age 16. 50% of the community. Today, that's about 1.2 million people. So you do the math. I would say that in the general population, the median mark is somewhere in the 30s or 40s. It's not 16. So these are things, again, I don't see the ultra-Orthodox movement as a threat, and I don't see them evil, but I say that because they're growing, we have to appreciate how they think and how they act in a much more intimate level. We have to understand if they're going to tell us this is what our community has decided, where this decision is coming from. Okay? The third thing is they're becoming more integrated in Israeli society. They're getting jobs and they're doing things more and more as they're growing, and as the fringes are becoming more modernized and more open to new ideas. By the way, some of those fringes are, the first thing they do is they deny the infallibilitas and the all-powerful doctrine of Daat Torah. It's one of the first things that they have to take away. The third thing is that they can help us understand them better and relate to them, because as much as, and this relates to everything that we've spoken about, is that understanding Daat Torah, understanding that if they come to us and say, you're trying to say you should serve in the army, but there's Daat Torah that says you can't serve in the army. There's some people that don't listen to it, but they're not listening to the Gedolim, and they're not part of our community. So people that go to Nahal Haredi are not considered to be part of the community because they don't accept Daat Torah. Now, by the way, some people might have referred, I think I saw in the chat for a second, in America and in England, things are a little bit different. They're not identical. In Israel, the community, because there is the draft and the service in the army, the community is much more held together by this, and they have to go to the yeshivas and they have to be within the community. Otherwise, there's no periphery. In America, there's many more ultra Orthodox style rabbis that do have secular education and that do have fully integrated within society. Somebody I think was mentioning about Ner Yisrael, which is the first yeshiva I was exposed to as a young child, that obviously had those things, as they have people that have doctorates, not just in computers and other things, but even in some humanities in John Hopkins and stuff like that. So, and social studies. So there are those, but when we're talking particularly in Israel of how this doctrine has developed. The final thing, and I don't even have we're going back to our first picture. I said, who's this rabbi right here? And he is the mystery rabbi. This rabbi is the Imrei Emet. He's the Rebbe Megur, the one that's buried in the Gur Center, that died during the War of Independence and wasn't able to be buried on Mount Olives. Why did I put him on the picture? And this goes back to some of the earliest research before Benny Brown by Lawrence. Where is the Daat Torah coming from? And this may help us understand a little bit more about what's going on. In the Hasidic world, the Daat Torah, the Rebbe, in some of the communities, went well beyond the scope of being just a halachic decider and a teacher, but because he's, as the tzaddik, has a special connection to God, both through his prayer and through his knowledge, he has the ability of answering questions that go well beyond whether or not the chicken is kosher or not. Now, this is as the Hasidic movement spread throughout Europe, particularly in Poland and Hungary, this affected the Lithuanian community. And so again, it's not my suggestion. It's something that all of the people that have written about Daat Torah, but Daat Torah basically is a way that Lithuanian rabbis can act like Hasidic rabbis, can act like the Hasidic Rebbe, and have a political tool that's just as powerful, if not more powerful. And as we began, Chava said, well, what about the Chas Chabad? The Alter Rebbe is famously quoted as when people asked him about mundane affairs, he says, that's not a question for me. And he was a halachis. He's the one that wrote Shulchan Aruch Harav, which is a classic book about halacha. Again, it's the standard book for Chabad halacha today. But in the Chabad world, it's only a much later development that the Rebbes were more invasive or influential in the daily lives of the people. And even it's not the rabbi. It's in the last Rebbe. Rabbi Menachem Mishner's son, he was very influential in his shluchim and telling his shluchim where to go and what to do and how to work, but he wasn't involved in the daily lives of many people. He helped people and people came to him, but it's not like it's very different than what happens in Gur. Gur set a precedent, especially the Imre Emes, and it leads to what's going on today. And if anybody's interested and can handle Hebrew, just recently, I think about a month ago, Benny Brown gave a wonderful lecture in Yad Ben Tzvi, giving over the development of the new social structure of Gur and how that's related today. So you're welcome to go listen to that in Yad Ben Tzvi study. Again in Hebrew. So what I'm trying to claim here is that when we look at ultra orthodoxy and we see on one side we have the Hasidim, the other side the Misnagdim, again they basically have almost converged in the method and the scope of their political leadership, and that if there is a decision that needs to be made in their communities, on the one side the Rebbe will make that decision and everyone must listen to it, and on the other side, even though there wasn't traditionally any formal authority of the rabbi in daily affairs, today there is. Now, I want to just clarify. That doesn't mean that in traditional Judaism, the rabbi didn't have an important role in public affairs. Very often there was a Rav and a Parnas. There was a rabbi and a political leader. And the rabbi would very often give over opinions and ideas, and there is a place for rabbis. Okay, right now I am quoting my rabbis, Rav Amital and Rav Lichtenstein, who both wrote about the challenges of Daat Torah as a modern thing, and they both remain make it very clear that it's very important to receive moral direction and to receive ethical direction from someone who has spent much time studying Torah. That is indisputable. But there's a limit to that. The limit is a rabbi shouldn't make decisions on medical affairs, on political affairs, if they don't have the proper training, if they don't have the proper knowledge. One of the things Rav Lichtenstein wrote is, Ein Daat Torah minayin, or manhigut minayin. If you don't have any wisdom, then where is your Torah and where is your leadership going to come from? And this is, again, one of the things, again, I don't want to be directly critical to any of the specific decisions, but this has the emunat mimah, and the concept of kulaba has led the Orthodox community in matters where wisdom would be a very good idea. Modern wisdom would be very good to tap into, whether it's the medical field, whether it's scientific field, whether it's in the public sphere, whether it's in all these things. And again, the coronavirus was a great example of this, is that they don't have that as part of their system. Like I wrote in a number of places, you can look at my Facebook, I wrote a whole thing about how Daat Torah basically remove the ability of the average Haredi person to stand up and say, I'm not going to synagogue or I'm not going to yeshiva, because if the rabbi says it's safer or it's more important to go pray and to go daven, then I have to go. That's what I have to do. So there are individuals that might not have listened, but as a community, they have to listen to Daat Torah and have to go listen to this. So that is, in a nutshell, this is the shortest one I've ever given, but might be the most important, of what Daat Torah is. What again, there may be other forms of it. Some of the national religious rabbis in the last generation, Rav in Merkaz Harav Yeshiva, started to speak in this language. In the last years, Rav Rav Yisraeli and others started to open up in this concept, but they're very often they were already held back. Rav Melamed, Rav Eliezer Melamed, who's one of the leaders of the from the Beit El world, he started the yeshiva in Har Bracha. He very clearly says, "I'm not going to listen to a gadol about affairs that he has no idea about, and that's not something you should be. I will listen to their halachic ideas, and I will put them in my books. But to listen to them on political and on medical and on all kinds of other things, that's not their realm, and they've never decided on that in the past, and they shouldn't do that in the future." And so when we speak of one of the things, and I sound very proud, like I'm willing to stand up, and I have done in the past, to any ultra Orthodox that claims they are more traditional than me, and I say, no, you're not. I might dress a little bit differently, but I am much more similar to the rabbis that existed in Europe 200 years ago than you are. Okay, and not just because not because they know how to read, but because because the ultra Orthodoxy has taken the community to a modern place. Now, it doesn't mean modern and new doesn't mean that's necessarily bad. And you're allowed to be novel, but they have to admit it. And they can't claim that this is the way it's been done forever. They can't claim they have superiority. This is the last point I'll make, is that it's completely elitist, this idea. The concept is that only the rabbi can make this decision, and only it can come from this. That's very different than the concept of Chabad. Chabad's concept is we can bring Messiah when every single person has to puts on tefillin and lights candles for Shabbat. There's something very democratic in the Chabad theology. Again, it's top down, but it's still, there's something very important of every single individual. Here, we have a theology which is completely based on this reverence to the Gadol Hador, whoever it is. And this, I'm just putting it can be in some cases, this is what I want to say is, one is that it's completely novel. This has never existed in Jewish history. There is the concept of the Sanhedrin, and the Sanhedrin has the ability to make things, but the Sanhedrin, every single person in the Sanhedrin needed to know 70 languages. The concept is they have to be able to communicate with everyone, but they have to have worldly knowledge, and they have to be able to make their decision based on everything that they have available to them. And so the rabbinic leadership today is not the Sanhedrin. It's not a prophet. It does make mistakes. It has made mistakes. That doesn't mean, but there is so much more to learn for it. And what I think as a person that does follow halacha, or tries to, is that if we adopt this, if this is Judaism, then there's another fear. Again, if the rabbi says Daat Torah is that we should all go to the yeshivas and shouldn't close them down, and everybody goes and gets sick and gets corona, well, what does that mean? There's a threat against Torah here, and that's another reason why I believe that these ideas should be spread. Okay, that's all. There's Tam Veloni Shlam. There's much more to be said. You're welcome to go and look at the different articles and continue to read, especially the works of Benny Brown, but others have taken that as well. And I hope this was interesting to everyone. And let's see if I'm just seeing if there's anything here. Yeah. Okay. Reminding me, you're actually, Judy's telling me the opposite. Okay, there we go. Sorry about the misspellings.
No, I thought it was very interesting, considering that Ner Yisrael promoted guys to college, but what he was really privately saying is, you don't need to.
You don't need to.
Ner Yisrael doing this to be they're the most liberal of all the Black Hat yeshivas, in a sense. They were always
right, and I think theologically they believe it, but practically it's kind of hard to learn algebra from Sefer Shemot, right? But there are ways of trying to integrate that, and there are books have been written about this, about how things are hinted to or in the Torah. But again, if you want to study molecular biology, it's better to go to medical school in Baltimore and not to Ner Yisrael. Although there are some that do both.
Good.
Okay, so again, I don't
Asher,
want this.
great. Thank
I
you very,
don't-
very much.
I do again. I want to make it very clear. This isn't an attack. I have some of my best friends are ultra Orthodox. No, I don't have, but I do think there is a threat. I think there's a threat here. A threat because if we don't understand this is the method of their leadership, in the next generation, we're going to be dealing with this on a daily level, and we don't realize you can't argue against it. You have to go to the source. You can't argue with an ultra-Orthodox person that has made a decision based on a Daat Torah. There's no argument there. It's not logical thinking. It's not rational thinking. They are doing what they did because the rabbi said, period. And
Wait,
so
can I-
the first thing you have to do, and this is what I've done, is you have to first take down this mask of Daat Torah and say, listen, we're allowed to be respectful to Rav Kanievsky, and we're allowed to listen to his Torah and to listen to his whatever, but we don't need to listen to him when it comes to going back to school or going back to yeshivas. We should listen to the doctors. We should listen to the experts. And the same thing goes for a number of other ideas. And so it's a difficulty. I've had these discussions with some ultra-Orthodox people. It's very hard to break down this screen because they have this screen there, and there's no, and it's very difficult to break through it.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
You're talking about Daat Torah, and basically that it depends on people, on particular rabbis who have authority in the ultra-Orthodox world, and everybody looks up to them, and they say, you're not allowed to go to the army or whatever. Right. They say, and the community has to listen. But right. Is it not true? I mean, aren't there more like there's more than one Hasidic Rebbe? Isn't there more than one in any given generation, more than one Lithuanian, Gadol, whatever, who has his community that listens to him? Here's
where the chaos begins. Here's where the chaos begins. Because yes, there usually is one rabbi that sort of takes the helm. This is what's happened since the Chazon Ish. The Chazon Ish was replaced by Rav Belvel by Rav Shach by Rav Elyashiv by Rav Steinman by Rav Kanievsky. Okay, and when Rav Kanievsky is going to get to Mea V'Esrim, it'll be one of the people that are out, Rav Edelman, whoever it's going to be, one of the prospects that's out there now. I'm sorry, I missed Rav Shlomo Zalman in the middle there. He was special though. Rav Shlomo Zalman was special because sometimes you would come to him and say, I don't know from that. He'll often say, I don't know. And there was something very special with Shlomo Zalman. He deserves, and I didn't put his picture up because he was special. I know this because Rav Lichtenstein used to go to him for questions, and he had a lot of respect for him, and he uses him as an example of someone that didn't use this tool of thing. It might a lot have to do with it. He wasn't involved politically. Okay? And he was a great tzaddik, but he was morally and ethically in every way, and that's something that they should point out those. But let's say the Peleg HaYerushalmi, if you might have heard them in the news, they're a group that is deviated, that happens to be their son, one of Rav Shlomo Zalman's sons and grandsons are involved with it, but that have deviated from the general theme, have gone off on one direction. Okay, and you have some people that have gone off in another direction, but mostly they're considered to be renegades and outcasts. Listen, also, if you go to a particular yeshiva, if you go to Mir, if you go to Brisk, if you go to Chevron, you're not going to go to the necessarily to Rav Chaim Kanievsky with a question. You'll go to your Rosh Yeshiva, and your Rosh Yeshiva will give you a decision. But as a whole, and therefore that you could come out to the situation, if you go to two rabbis, you can get to two different ideas. When we talk about publicly, whether it's within their own community or a decision that's made in the political sphere, it's usually done by a central rabbi, like Rav Chaim Kanievsky. It's going to be done by them. When you have daily things, so you do have different rabbis, and we've seen in the past that there were different decisions regarding doing Shrut Leumi. There were some rabbis that thought it was a very good alternative to the army. But it was overwhelmingly said, no, that you're not allowed to. Okay, and let's say today one of the most important Torahs affecting the community is that you're not allowed to have a smartphone. Okay, and this is something that's, and now it's more enforced in the Hasidic community, but and you understand why that is so critical in the Corona world, because the coronavirus crisis, meaning that so many people didn't have cell phones. Their only method of receiving information was through their internal spheres, and they were told this. They didn't know any of the news that we all knew. They weren't listening to Ynet. They weren't listening to Rod. Some were following Rodder, but they didn't have the information. And so you come to them, why weren't you staying at home? They were told they should send the kids to Gan and send the boys to yeshiva. So we have to be clear that never. So in terms of the communities, you can have a situation where there are multiple Torahs, and very often, let's say, even if you look at the, if you still see the screen, you can see the here. This is a Torah. The very anti here. This one. One of them is you're not allowed to vote in the regular elections. Here's no internet. This one is no voting. Okay, so obviously there's a whole group of them that believe they are supposed to vote. So but that one Torah says one way and Torah says the other way. So yeah, there is a
So for me, it's a scary thought that in 3 years from now, the majority of the population of this country is going to be
not 3 years,
over
not
18.
majority. No. We're talking. They will
Because
not
they're now under 16. They're gonna grow up. And they're gonna be over 18.
No,
Some of them are gonna
50%
be
of their community is under 16.
Okay.
Okay,
They are also a growing
the
majority.
prospects of them being 50% of the community is somewhere around the year 3000, but I don't think it's going to end up that way.
And is there a way to?
They're going to have to get a
break
job
this
until then, and
cycle?
then they're going to.
Is there a way to break this cycle? Because
I don't think we should attack them. I don't think we should in any way try to take arms or anything. We should be educated on our own. And when we're privately speaking with them, you can raise the issue. Are you aware that this isn't exactly how it works?
Because like what you brought the example with the corona,
Yeah.
I promise you their rabbis have smartphones, like the big and they're
okay. You're bringing up another thing that I didn't mention that's very important. That is, some of the rabbis that were active publicly in former generations were very active and out there, and they knew things and stuff like that. But in the last few generations, with Rav Elyashiv, Rav Steinman, they were secluded in a room and they had no access to the public world.
So are you saying that none of the people who are up close
with Rav Elyashiv was Rav Efrati. Rav Steinman has his Rav Kanievsky, it's his grandson. So each one, and they're the most important people really in this world, because they're the ones that filter what comes in and what goes out.
You're saying all the machers that are right under the rabbis don't have smartphones and don't.
They all have smartphones. No, they have two phones. They have a smartphone and a kosher.
Right, so they do have access.
Torah Shebechtav and Torah Sheba'al Peh.
Access, and they know what's going on.
For
but
sure.
They're choosing not to tell the community because
there's as I said, this they have an elitist theology that believes that we know better than everyone else. We're going to tell you what is going to be
right. So it's it's not coming down that it's the people's fault, but it's the upper people that are not. Is there a way to break that? Is there?
Yeah. It's called revolt, and that's when if you educate. That's why they're so.
I know that's happening in America right now.
If you educate all of their students really, really well, and give them English and give them science and give them math, who knows? Maybe they'll come to read one of Betty Brown's articles. I was sitting in the classroom with Betty Brown with a few Ultra Orthodox people that broke out, and there are a few of them. I don't want to mention them now, because we'll try to put this on the public web. So I'm not going to mention their names, but there are a few rabbis out there that are doing things like this within the community. One of the things that I'll tell Yossi Sari, Lapid, and Sarid, you could tell them also, is that these things any change that's going to be effective has got to be from within. It's not going to be from outside.
I mean, look what they're doing in America now with Hatzalah and Ezlas Nashim, the women who want to be EMTs, and how the rabbis are like so against it, so it's pushing the entire community against them.
Okay, listen, they're going to be conflicts, you know, within any community, and that's natural and that's healthy. What I'm saying here is that the political tool of Daat Torah has now developed and has, let's say, has morphed into this all-powerful tool that goes well beyond what traditional rabbinic leadership used to be. Okay, again, this you have to go back again to see what traditional rabbinic leadership was. Now, some rabbis are very good political leaders. That's possible. But there is a threat, and this goes back to Washington's inaugural address. There's a threat to having too much power in one place, and we can see that from other places in Israeli society today, and I'm not going to mention any, but having too much power in one place is dangerous. Okay, it's dangerous. I didn't see it necessarily bad. Washington said that, but it could be, and we have to be very careful of that. And it's rabbis is very helpful. This is, by the way, Rav Soloveitchik very often is quoted is saying something in the regards of Daat Torah in the eulogy he gave to his uncle, to Chaim Ozer Grudinsky, but he apparently did change his mind regarding this. And he wrote clearly later on in life, this is something Norman Lamb has wrote before in a few times, that he clearly changed his mind. And he believed that regarding, let's say, the peace process, that the decision should be made by political and leaders that know what's going on, and military leaders that should not be made by rabbis and things like that. Okay, so I see we still have some people that are hanging on. If there's anybody else with a comment or a question, more than happy. We're fortunately not in a rush to go anywhere right now. Do we have any other questions, comments? Complaints you can put on the chat, it'll disappear. Okay, so I hope that was helpful. If anybody has any specific questions, you're more than happy to
I'd like
email.
To ask a question.
Yeah.
Do you give this lecture anywhere in Hebrew for my Hardali family?
I have not given this. I did give this in Hebrew. I was going through my notes. I gave it in 2010 in Yedidia in Hebrew. But if there's a group, I'm more than happy to maybe give something. I might give this to my friends soon. I've given this about half a dozen times in different formulations. As I said, the mini crusade, thinking this is a very important thing people should understand. Most people have heard it. Most people really don't understand how novel it is and what it really means. And I think Benny Brown really has helped us in clarifying it, and I hopefully will be helpful in thing. I would suggest, and I haven't done a full thing, but but if you find, I'm assuming that Benny Brown, one of his lectures is available, and he's the source. So what I've done a little bit more than Benny is try to understand where the political implications and the social implications are of the Daat Torah doctrine. He's more of the philosopher and the legal expert that's trying to understand where it fits within the context of Jewish theology and philosophy and legal history. Okay. Anything else? Donna, I can't hear you. If you're talking to me, you're muted.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Asher. This was great.
Okay. Very good.
And, yes. Guys, have a great weekend. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Bye-bye.
Bye.